Really glad you're asking this question. Um, I am of the opinion that the internet is wrong on this.
That clip is from an interview I did with Jake from House DM, where we were discussing Shadowdark and what we liked about it, what we love about it, and what we think some people get wrong about it. The other half of the conversation was about Into the Shadowlands, Jake's supplement for Shadowdark, and you can see the rest of that conversation in this video. This half of the conversation starts with us talking about the setting for Shadowdark.
And Shadowdark doesn't really have a full-on setting except for the like curse scrolls.
Right. Yeah, and I feel like the cursed scrolls have that implied world building as well, right? Because each one adds new classes to the game. But like Kelsey hasn't spelled out, okay, well, this desert from the Red Sands cursed scroll is over here, and this forest from cursed scroll number 1 is over there. Like she doesn't spell it out, but you kind of get this feeling that there are these distinct parts of the Shadowdark world, and different types of classes kind of inhabit those sections of the realm or whatever it is.
Yeah. Yeah, and that's also a really interesting piece too. Is like I'm sure other people have also drawn this conclusion of like, well, what if all the curse scrolls are in one world, and that is
Right.
like the world of Shadowdark, And then
Yeah.
I look at this map behind me of Crown and Skull, and I'm just like, what if Shadowdark is there? Like it's just there's so many aspects of it that like Curse Scroll One could be the swamps in any part of your world. And I think that was the original intent of those designs. I can't speak for Kelsey on that matter, but having kind of more of a generic like swamp or sand place allows you to just kind of drop it into any aspect of your campaign and like have countless adventures from that. And that's where I see value in that kind of product.
Matt Coville recently did a video was pretty popular, and I think Professor Dungeon Master did kind of a reaction video to it, talking about like the difference between your 5e big campaign setting adventure books versus the old school modular style of adventures where you can kind of drag and drop and mix and match the different modular adventures, which of course is how I grew up playing. And I definitely agree with Matt on a lot of those points that he made about the advantage of the smaller modular adventures versus those larger hardback books.
Yeah, that video hit a spot for me for sure. The biggest challenges I've had with running Curse of Strahd, like that was the last big 5e like book that I ran, and like I wish that was just a smaller module. Like it would have
Hmm.
been great if I like instead tried to just grab like the original Ravenloft, like I don't know, it was like a zine or a pamphlet. It was like not like a thick 8.5 by 11 massive book. Like I just don't have the time to like go through and read all of that. I guess
Right.
I'm too
Yeah.
much of a minimalist in that regard.
Yeah. The original Ravenloft was pretty much just Strahd and the castle for the most part. Like all this stuff, you know, all outside the castle, that was all added for the 5th edition just to make it longer so they could put it in that, you know,
Yeah,
hardback format. Yeah.
yeah.
Or I'm actually in the middle of a campaign right now where I'm running the new one of the newer ones, the Fandelver and Below. So basically, I took Lost Mines of Fandelver and these other adventures and kind of mix and match them all in the sandbox, and then my players are just now getting out of the sandbox and going into the you know and below part of the adventure where where you get into all the Lovecraftian stuff.
Yeah, and
So
that's great, like, being able to just, like, drop things here and there, like, everyone has their different, like, vibe of what they want to experience in their campaign and their story, and, like, I think when I first got started with, D&D, I really wanted to have that, like, epic Lord of the Rings campaign
right,
experience, like, that's what I was chasing, that's what I was after, and then having done that now, like, a couple times, I'm like, "Well, now it's kinda just feeling a little, like, redundant." I kinda want something that's, like, a little lower stakes, but, like, more exploratory and, like, well, maybe not lower stakes, not like the world is ending, you have to go save the world, but, like, this town's gonna be destroyed, like, on a smaller scale, but also I'm just a dude that wants to get rich. Like, that to
right.
me is, like, I think more appeasing now, since I've done the whole, like, save the world thing. I just wanna do, like, a West Marches, just go look for ruins and find loot, and then just be, like, adventurers. Um, yeah, something like
Yeah.
that.
Yeah, I think the kinda smaller focus lends itself to a more personal stakes,
Mhm.
right? So it can be just, this is our town and we have to protect our town from this horde of zombies, and hopefully we also get rich in the process, right? Or something like that versus the big epic save the world, climb Mount Doom and throw the ring in kind of,
Yeah. Or
you know.
interdimensional travel and all that stuff, it's just like, "Oh, goodness." Like, feels sci-fi at that point.
Yeah, but I guess that's the beauty of the hobby, right? Is you can do all of the above, right? You can run one campaign that's very like, you know, personal stakes and grim dark, and then you can run, high fantasy world hopping spelljammer style adventure. You don't have to, stick to one style. From every campaign, you can mix it up.
Yeah, yeah,
Along those lines, kind of coming back to Shadowdark, because Shadowdark kind of gets billed as like the ultimate dungeon crawler because it is very well designed for dungeon crawling. You've been playing it for a while now. What is your take on that? Can it be more than a dungeon crawler? Can you have the longer campaigns and the more narrative stories with a Shadowdark game?
really glad you're asking this question. Um, I am of the opinion that the internet is wrong on this. I think that while Kelsey designed this system to be, like you said, very akin to the classic dungeon crawl and really encompasses the mindset of what the OSR was with like original versions of D&D back in the day. While it lends itself to that, I don't think that that is like its core. Like I don't think that's what it is at its core, because
Right.
really, like for someone like me, I love having a more lean rules light system, and
Mhm.
Shadowdark is so much more rules light and so much more lean compared to other versions of D&D where you just get bogged down by all these rules, and that allows you to have these bigger adventures, these longer campaigns, leave the dungeon and go do overland travel type stuff. And this whole like, oh well, the torch timer, the Shadow Dark was designed for dungeon crawling because of like the torch timer mechanic. I'm like, that's just one rule. It's like an optional rule. Like, I mean, it's a core rule, but like you don't have to do that. And that just because that exists doesn't mean that the game was only designed for that.
Right.
A great example of this is my adventure that I ran at Dungeon Masterpieces Green Dragon Fest. I kind of went into that design of that adventure to be like, look, the internet seems to think Shadow Dark is designed for dungeon crawls. I'm going to design an adventure that's not a dungeon crawl and kind of just challenge a lot of those status quo viewpoints about what Shadow Dark is. It's only for dungeon crawls. It's only for one shots. Yada yada yada. Like, no, here's an adventure that is a one shot, but could easily roll into an actual campaign.
Right.
And there may be like there's like a little dungeon crawl like aspect. There's like a cave and like a little bit of like rooms and stuff to explore, but like that's just one location,
Right.
and it worked great. Everyone seemed to
Yeah.
have a blast. I had a blast writing it. It was simple and easy to do, and to me, that's like the real core ethos of Shadow Dark is more minimalist design, so you can like really, as a GM, like feel as though the game is ready to go, and you don't have to micromanage every little thing. You can kind of sit back and like embellish your descriptions and focus more on your NPC interactions because you're not like tracking all these little tiny nitty bitty itty whatever stuff.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. And I loved playing in your game at Green Dragon Fest because it was, of all the games that I played in, they were all great. Every DM had their, strengths. I'd really enjoyed the player choices that were available in that adventure. Like it felt like our choices really had meaning. Uh, and then finding out afterwards that that was true because the other two groups played the game completely differently.
Yeah, and that was one of the coolest aspects of that, and I'll talk about this in a third. God, I'm talking about 3 videos. This is the life of someone who, has a full job and can't do YouTube full time. But I have another video that talks about the choices of the 3 groups and, like, how each game drastically was different from, the
Mhm.
first, second, third. They're all very different games, but it was the same adventure. I just ran it 3 times in a row.
Right.
So yeah, yeah.
The other thing too, I had a conversation with Kelsey at Green Dragon Fest talking about upcoming videos. I'm working on one where I used just the random tables in the Shadow Dark book to create an adventure. And I was talking with Kelsey about it, and I mentioned that I was using the city random tables, and she was excited to hear that because she says everybody says Shadow Dark's a dungeon crawler, but if it's a dungeon crawler, why did I work so hard on all those city tables? Because there's like I think like 8 or 10 different city districts on the random table list,
Indeed,
and
indeed there are.
she was talking about how like she did that intentionally to kind of show again that kind of implied world building that it's not just for dungeon crawls because like there's all these random encounter tables for pretty much any different type of city you can think of, like temple district and capital district, all these different city districts. I thought that was a poignant comment on Kelsey's part to be like, no, it's definitely more than just a dungeon crawler.
Yeah.
No, I I think there's just a subset of people that really like dungeon crawls, and I think that's been a chunk of the OSR movement. So, latching on to the fact that Shadow Dark has this torch timer mechanic makes it, very. This is a very precise way to do dungeon turns and run a dungeon crawl. And I think people are just really excited for that. But then that, internet groupthink turns that into, oh, Shadowdark's just for dungeon crawls.
Yeah, and dungeon crawling is like such a lost art, especially coming from 5e, where like you didn't really do that as much.
That conversation got cut when I was working on the Into the Shadowlands video because that video mostly focused on House and his recent projects. But I didn't want to lose that conversation, so you get a second video. I hope you appreciated it. And just to kind of sum up, here's a quick list of the main points from that conversation. So Shadowdark does lend itself to OSR play, and it is great for dungeon crawling. But that does not mean it's only for dungeon crawling. The modularity of Shadowdark zines does not mean you have to run each one as a separate adventure. You can certainly knit them together into a larger campaign. In fact, you can mix them with other Shadowdark adventures made by third-party creators, or you could combine them with old AD&D adventures, or really any other old-school games adventures. So you could use Shadowdark to play just about any style of game. The only limitation might be the high fantasy epic world-saving style of play that 5th edition is good for. Just because you're not saving the world doesn't mean there's no stakes. You can still have high stakes in low fantasy. But what it means is you have a more grounded style of play, and the stakes, while high, are also more personal. Who do you want to save? Why do you want to save them? The minimalist design of Shadowdark means the game is ready to go. Since you're not working so hard on remembering rules or making rulings, your brain space is free to really focus on the narrative and the storytelling. Ultimately, Kelsey Dion herself said Shadowdark is definitely designed for more than just dungeon crawling. Thanks for sticking all the way to this point of the video. I do want to point out that the internet connection wasn't fantastic during that interview, and you probably noticed some lag. I'm working on getting that upgraded. And I say that because I'm talking to several other creators about coming on the show as well, one of whom is Kelsey Dion herself, where we will talk more about Shadowdark and game design. But I don't want to bring anybody else on the show until I get that upgrade. So stay tuned. Thanks again for visiting the Dire Den, and I'll see you next time.